Welcome to On the Table with Ashley. This is our food and connection series that explores the many ways people create connection through food, from community gardens and classrooms to dinner tables across the world. The series highlights stories of gathering nourishment, memory, and care. Through insightful conversations with experts from all walks of life, the vulnerable conversations shared over dinner, the scents and recipes that carry memories of home, and the grassroots efforts communities make to combat food insecurity and support one another. Through these conversations, we examine how food unites people, preserves culture, conjures memory, and creates identities. Ultimately, the series reveals the profound role food plays in nearly every human experience. Our guest today is Dr. Rachel Herz, a neuroscientist and world-leading expert on the psychological science of smell. She has been conducting research on the senses of smell and taste, emotion, motivated behavior, and cognition since 1990. Dr. Herz has been on the faculty at Brown University since 2000 and is currently an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Psychiatry and Human Behavior and teaches a seminar course on olfaction in the CoPsy department. Dr. Herz is the newly elected president of the International Society of Neurogastronomy. Her most recent book, Why You Eat, What You Eat, The Science Behind Our Relationships with Food, explores how our senses, brain, and psychology shape our perception of food and the experiences and consequences of eating. Why You Eat, What You Eat was a finalist for the 2018 Readable Feast Awards and listed among the best food books of 2018 by the Smithsonian and the New Yorker. Dr. Herz is also an advocate and an advisor, professional consultant, and frequently called upon as an expert witness. Enjoy.
Dr. Rachel Herz, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm thrilled to be talking with you. I have so many questions. I know we're not going to be able to get through all of them, but look forward to covering as much as we can.
Excellent, Ashley. Thank you very much for having me on your show.
So, I always like to start hearing a little bit about where you grew up and what kind of kid you were.
So I grew up mainly in Montreal.
Mm,
And what kind of kid was I? Well, I was a little shy, a little sad, very curious. So we moved around a lot before we got to Montreal. So it was always like starting in kindergarten, I was like, who's the new kid? And so by the time, which was only grade two, that we got to Montreal, I was always like the weird new kid. So that put me at a certain social disadvantage, but I watched how children interacted and tried to figure out how to get friends. And I think
well, I'm sure it taught you a lot. Did you like to be outdoors? Were there any hobbies you had specifically?
so. I did like to be outdoors. I did horseback riding. I played tennis. My best friend growing up was someone named Heather. We rode our bikes all over the place all the time, all day, all night, as much as we could. So I guess that, and she and I went horseback riding together. I went skiing in the winter. So I did a lot of outdoor activity.
And do you think that anything in your childhood or upbringing had an impact on the profession that you chose? And I'll just mention for listeners and you can describe it more, but the way that I understand it is that you have joined biology and psychology
Mhm.
in a field that's called neurogastronomy, which is the psychology and neuroscience of taste, flavor, and food.
So I've always been very sensorially oriented, and my mom would be always yelling at me things like, stop squeezing the bread. Things like this. So looking back, one's life narrative always makes sense retrospectively. At the time, I would not have said being really into smelling, tasting, feeling, looking, etc. With food in particular would have led this path to unfold before me. But I suppose retrospectively, it all does make sense. And in terms of where I am now, my undergraduate background was in biology. And then I started switching into what would now be called neuroscience. But at the time, it was like biopsychology and then more real, quote unquote, in the field of psychology. So I was always trying to make the biology and the psychology, as you said, marry each other and figure out a way to bring those two angles together. And studying the sense of smell and studying food and the emotions, motivations and behaviors and learning and memory all connected to that is a very good way to do it.
Absolutely. And now you are a professor, you are a writer. You've authored both books that are available for the general public and also a number of academic papers. Is there any other part of what you're doing that I've missed?
So I do a lot of public speaking and a lot of podcasts like this. So I guess one of the things I would say about myself, and I do a lot of research. So I'm also involved in various research teams, ongoing projects right now, funded by the NIH and also collaborating with other colleagues. I don't currently have a lab in my setup right now at Brown University. I'm adjunct professor, assistant professor. So I kind of departed from the mainstream academic path a number of years ago. So I've been able to pursue consulting, which I do a lot of, and then the writing, as you said, in the public speaking. But I'm also a really big advocate, and in particular for educating people about the amazing importance of our sense of smell, which everybody takes for granted, or most people take for granted. So I'm on the advisory board for a number of organizations, nonprofits like the Smell and Taste Association of North America, World Taste and Smell Association, what's called Smell Taste in the UK. Also, the NIH has a new Smell and Taste Center. So that kind of work. And I'm the incoming president for the International Society for Neurogastronomy. So doing all of this, it's all volunteer. It's all really to try to get the word out about the importance of our senses and the importance of the experiences that they give us, in particular, the lesser appreciated ones, and especially the sense of smell.
So I wanted to focus in this series on food and gathering because I feel like the table is where so many memories are forged. I'm actually just returning from my mother's funeral, and she was an immaculate hostess. I mean, she set the most beautiful table, she cooked the most amazing meals, and she welcomed people into our home with grace and ease. And not everyone can do that. We all have different strengths and weaknesses, but I do feel like so much of what I do today is focused on what I got from her and this sense of the table and what we can achieve around the table. But I also think that the table can be a place where we put walls up and where we don't get the benefits of that. And so want to talk to a number of different people with expertise in different areas to sort of dig into that. So I know there are so many things we can talk about and we're going to have limited time, but maybe we can talk first about the community aspect of food. In a prior conversation, you and I talked about both inclusiveness and also how our preferences are shaped by culture, and those can be extremely divergent. And maybe those can keep us from connecting around the table, but I don't think they have to. So, anyway, let's dive into that first.
Well, that you gave a really great opening to a lot of different angles we can discuss. And certainly the breaking bread together as a way to share and show affiliation and interaction and support is extremely important culturally. So, for example, if I'm a stranger and you offer me food, it would be very bad in most cultures for me to refuse you. To refuse that would be a sign of not wanting to take this gift, which is what food is, but also a rejection of you and your culture and what you're representing to me. So the idea of accepting food from someone who offers it to you has a long history of social collaboration and cohesion, and a cultural aspect of that very importantly as well. But it's also certainly the case that at a more personal and specific kind of precise level, we have a lot of individual variability in terms of both how we like to eat or not like to eat, our willingness to accept novel foods. For example, there's a trait referred to as neophobia, which is literally fear of the new, and specifically it refers to fear of new food. And certain all people vary on the scale of how neophobic or not that they are. And people who are highly neophobic would be would be traumatized to be accepting of the stranger's food, especially if it was something that they were totally unfamiliar with. So maybe realizing it's really important for me to do this, but having a much greater difficulty doing it and probably not doing it in a lot of other circumstances. So the ease with which you are able to explore food is something that's very much the individual. And also, as you pointed out, the ease at which you are able to be generous and want to bring people into your home. It's a social environment and one which is very personal. And some people don't feel very comfortable with that, don't like to entertain at home for whatever reasons. Other people are very, very much wanting to do that a lot of the time. Often I would say that one's skill, so your mother's skill in the kitchen and skill as a host probably went a long way to her ease and comfort and delight in making that happen for other people, but someone who was not so confident, someone who may also from a personality perspective just not like that level of socialization and the pressure to feel like I'm making a really good meal and maybe not being as confident as a cook and so forth. All those things go into it. So it's a very complex formula for and recipe for how you set the table, as it were, depending on who you are and whom you're with.
And what have you studied about the benefits we get from that communal aspect, whether it's in a home or in a restaurant? And maybe they're different in the two settings, but I'm interested in, I suspect the reason that you're doing all of this advocacy work is because you feel like there is a really big benefit for humans to be more in touch with the sense of smell and to recognize what the benefits are.
Absolutely, that's why I'm doing the advocacy work for the sense of smell. But food, which obviously involves smell, and most people, when they realize that they have a deficit in their sense of smell, will say things like, something's off with my taste. I can't taste properly. It is almost always nothing to do with their sense of taste, but it's to do with their experience of food, which is very much influenced by the aromas of what we're eating and the aromas of the food around us. So, taste from a purely sensory perspective is really just salty, sour, sweet, and bitter. And umami as well, depending on how you're going to start classifying things. But umami is very salty. So, that's a little bit off the bat. But anyway, everything else comes from our nose. So bacon, for example, just tastes like salt. And it's the 150 different aromatic compounds that are in the bacon bouquet that are being brought up through inhalation while we're chewing to the olfactory epithelium, which is where we're doing the sensing of smell, while we have that taste of salt in our mouth that gives us the perception of bacon. But because it's happening in our mouth, people think of the mouth as taste. And so the word taste has come to really represent that. Although technically the real explanation would be flavor being the combination of taste and smell. So in any case, that is definitely something which I'm passionate about explaining and having people realize that it's really to do with their nose. Very recent work actually that's just come out has shown that the physical health of our bodies in aging is related to our capability to smell. So people who have worse olfactory capabilities are actually have poor performance on these tasks like how, sitting up from a chair or balancing or gait speed. So how quickly you walk, which are all measures in later life of frailty and general health. And so people who are, 70 plus who have more difficulty with their sense of smell actually have more difficulty in these physical capabilities. And the worse their sense of smell, the worse these physical capabilities are. And this is a really important sign of quality of life, of health span, and also of lifespan. And what has been shown previous to this in several studies now is that actually our lifespan is directly related to our smell function. So people who have a distorted or dysfunctional sense of smell, this is again middle age and over, who otherwise are equal to everyone else. Those who have a diminished sense of smell actually are 4 times more likely to die within a 5-year period than those who have normal smell function. So it's really related to physical life as well as emotional life, social life, and all other aspects that we normally think of: sexual life, intimacy, our sense of ourselves. But when it comes to food, there's definitely another layer that I'm very interested in expressing, and that is the fact that our experience of food is really multisensory. It isn't just also that it involves our senses, it involves memory, it involves our social environment, it involves the experiences that we have had with other people or that we're having with other people at that very time. So, for example, one of the things that can be a peril, but is often actually something which is enjoyable, is distraction while we're eating. So, when we're in a social setting, we are typically distracted by our conversations with the other people around the table, which is very positive and so forth. But because we're distracted from eating, we may not really realize what we're eating or how much we're eating. And this is especially the case when you're at a table that someone has set for you and there's no rush to get out and there's multiple dishes. So like a Thanksgiving dinner is a classic example of that, where there's multiple dishes and multiple people sitting around a table for an extended period of time, and people tend to eat much more in these occasions than they do when they're by themselves or when there are fewer options. So there's a couple of things going on, but distraction is a big one. And that's why eating while working or eating while watching television or doing other things is a real problem, because people will often look over and say, how did that bowl suddenly get empty? And as you're eating with someone who you don't like, then we actually tend to eat less and we don't mirror what they're doing. Whereas when we're with people that we do like, we tend to mirror what they're doing and then eat more, but we're less engaged in the food itself. So we may get less pleasure and less satiation, satisfaction.
There are so many questions I have on this. So, one of them, going back to the health aspects of the sense of smell, which is fascinating. Do you think you can train your sense of smell to get it back or to improve it? I talked in a prior episode with a blind man who has done these dining in the dark experiences, and his sense of smell is quite extraordinary, and also hearing, and he said he's really had to hone his other skills because he can't see. Like when he's crossing the street, he's hearing things that you or I probably wouldn't hear because it's tied to his physical safety, and so he's so attuned to it. But with his sense of smell, he can smell like when leaves are changing. I'm interested in what the science says about that.
So I bet you can smell all those things as well as he can, but you're not paying attention the way he's paying attention. And like he said, he really trained himself to recognize the difference between a leaf that was, green versus a leaf that is about to fall off the tree in the fall. So in terms of the quality of the smells there. So my guess actually is that you can do all the smelling things that he can do, but you are just not paying the same level of attention and you haven't honed in your mind to smelling in the same way. So when we're actually focusing our attention on what we're smelling, we actually do smell more. So one of the things, because smells are invisible and we are so visually oriented, assuming we can see, we tend to sort of disregard the scents that are around us all the time. And it's only when our attention is really drawn to it that you're like, oh yeah, I can smell that. But if I didn't ask you, like, can you smell something right now in the room you're in? You probably wouldn't be even thinking that there was any smell there, but probably there is some background scent that if you started to think about it right now and took a big inhalation, you might go, oh, that's right. Or you could smell the perfume of someone who's in there with you or whatever the case might be. So our attention really is a major, major feature. It's also the case that the more we learn about smell and the more we're sort of in tune with it, the better we can sort of smell things. And I mean, I can tell you my personal experience when I was a graduate student and first started doing this work, and I got all these chemicals from International Flavors and Fragrances, who were kind enough to ship all these things to me. I was at the University of Toronto at the time, and the labels on these jars, which had chemical names to them, were things that, I would say, oh, this could be a familiar smell. But now that I know that this is called isoamyl acetate, for example, as opposed to saying, let's say banana, which is the common name for it. But really just the library in my mind of smells had expanded because I'd learned more about them in this time. Not that my sense of smell had gotten better. However, to your question, yes, we can make our sense of smell better by active and deliberate sniffing. And, one of the things that people may have heard about is something called smell training, which for people who've lost their sense of smell, especially when it's due to a viral infection where there's hope that it will come back. So not a traumatic injury where there's potentially the case that it's not able to be regenerated. But in viral cases, it's not all the time, but there's potential for it to be regained. Then doing active sniffing really does seem to have some help. It doesn't work for everybody and it can take a while and it can be frustrating and people cannot see the benefits, but active sniffing, so taking a deep inhalation and sniffing something that you know what it is, if you could smell it. So Vicks Vapor Rub, for example, you know what it is. So you think about that's what I'm smelling and you sniff it and you do that a couple of times a day with, several smells that are very familiar to you like that. And slowly, it is possible that through both regeneration in the nose itself, as well as connecting up to where in the brain our conscious perceptions of scent is being processed, getting one's sense of smell back can happen. Now, regardless, everyone, and especially with aging, because just like our all of our other senses, and it seems like smell is really critical in this regard, as recent research is showing, we can try to maintain a better sense of smell in aging as it would, start to normally decline by doing this as well. So, sort of taking yourself to the nose gym every day, as it were, and just sniffing a couple of things around the house really deliberately, and maybe doing it when you pass by something, just concentrating for a second and sniffing and then thinking about it. That will be very good for your sense of smell. And there's also research before what I just mentioned about physical states that have shown that cognition and staving off dementia and just generally keeping good cognitive health in aging is improved by doing this smell training. So there's a lot of benefits to this that are, it's a very simple thing to do. No gym clothes required. So you can just go ahead and do it anywhere you are. And it has a lot of potential benefits.
That's fascinating. Okay, well, I'm gonna embark on my own smell training. Somebody just told me recently I'm going to a wedding this summer, and somebody suggested have the bride and groom go together and pick out a perfume if the bride wears perfume and to wear on that day. And if you wear it on that day, it will be a smell and a memory that will conjure up this happy day for the rest of their lives. Is there truth in that? Like where we smell, does that matter?
Yes, that totally matters and it works. But one thing that is important here is that, first of all, it's not a perfume that the bride and groom already know and are familiar with and have past associations to. So they have to go find a new fragrance that they haven't either of them smelled before and known before with other people. And wearing it on their wedding day and possibly also maybe into the honeymoon, but not wearing it apart from that. Because if you start wearing it all the time, then it's just going to become a wash with sort of general life. And also, if you wear it all the time, you're going to stop being able to smell it yourself because we desensitize to fragrances we're around all the time. So, really just kind of keep it on the shelf, as it were, after the particular moments that you're capturing in your memory, and then go back to it. So, maybe on an anniversary, the bride can wear that again to like remember our wedding day and so forth, and the two of them will have this really strong memory. I actually do that myself with special vacations. So I'll buy a particular perfume to wear only during that time of travel, and then when special occasions at home, I'll put it on and I'll say to my husband, for example, so what do I smell like? And he'll go, Hawaii or South Africa, Vegas.
See, that's amazing. I'm gonna do that too. That's
Yeah.
amazing. I also have a recollection. So my father died 11 years ago, and when I was very young, he smoked a pipe, which is a very unusual smell. And I have a very strong memory walking along the street years later, smelling a pipe, and just like my dad just like came to me. And so that's a little different because he smoked a pipe regularly, but during a specific period of time. Is that also typical?
Yes, because the distinctiveness of the pipe smell was associated specifically to your father. So even though it was a regular occurrence, it was branded to him in terms of association. And because, as you said, smoking a pipe is not a very popular or common thing, when you do come across that scent, it is specifically connected to that past memory. If so, the issue here is the specificity of it connected to that one person and not to like 20 people that all smoke the same pipe tobacco. And the fact that in the interim period, you're not, meeting new people, smoking pipes, being in various pipe smoking places and so forth. So the distinctiveness of it is very specific to your father. And so you have that particular memory to him. And I actually had that with my grandfather who smoked a pipe. So I totally know exactly what you mean. And it is the case that when there's a particular scent associated to a specific person or event that doesn't get interfered with in the interim of life, then when you smell that scent again, you'll be brought back to that person or place or time.
That's fascinating. Okay, you talked about if somebody's watching TV, if they're distracted and watching TV, number one, they might eat more than they thought they had. And number two, they don't feel full, so they're not satiated. So, can you talk about sensory specific how do you say it?
Satiety.
Satiety. Can you talk to us about sensory specific satiety? What is it? Does everybody experience it? Another example you gave in a prior conversation we had was if I'm hosting a dinner party and I'm cooking all day, I might not be hungry by the time dinner gets there because of all the smells in the cooking. But I think it's a fascinating topic.
Yes. So sensory specific satiety is not quite the same thing as what's happening when I look over and say, how did that bowl suddenly get empty?
Okay.
That's really distraction. And not feeling satiated from it is basically because I'm not really consciously aware that I ate something. And, snack food also tends to be foods that don't really typically kind of fill us up in the same kind of way that nutritionally dense foods do. So if you were distracted while eating steak and baked potatoes, you'd probably feel somewhat full, but kind of wonder why when the plate was empty, but like bowls of potato chips and so forth, those tend to disappear without us feeling like we consumed anything. But to your question about sensory specific satiety, what that means is that when we are exposed to something with the same sensory profile repeatedly, we basically get full of it or more actually accurately sick of it. The original studies found that the pleasantness of, for example, M&Ms that were all the same color were decreasing overeating all the yellow M&Ms. So the first M&M that's yellow, yes, it tastes good, but by the time you're at the 10th M&M that's yellow, it's not quite as good. But if I gave you a green one, well, now it's just as good again. So that's a case where I'm talking about flavor, but also color here. And by the way, people think that the Skittles with different colors and the M&Ms with different colors actually have different flavors. They do not. They're all identical. It's just color, but color can actually trick us a lot when it comes to food. And it's one of the reasons why eating is so an interesting multisensory experience. So studies also taking flavor into account. So studies, for example, that had people eating sandwiches of ostensibly like equal sizes, shapes, and so forth, and the filling was just different in each case. If I gave you all the same sandwiches, let's say 10 little mini finger sandwiches, all with the same filling, you'd be like, okay, no, I'm sick of them after six, let's just say. Whereas if I gave you these little finger sandwiches with different fillings, so it's flavor, which is really smell because ostensibly the taste is just kind of salty, let's just say, then you'd be like, I got through all 10, which is again why going back to the Thanksgiving dinner table, because there's so much variety, that's where we start eating more. So variety is the opposite of sensory specific satiety. So variety encourages more tasting and sampling, and monotony, when it's always the same, we start decreasing our interest in that food and liking of that food. And having these same packets of foods to eat can get problematic because people can stop eating the full amounts. And even though they're supposed to be calorically, and nutritionally what you need, if people are getting sick of them literally and not wanting to eat them, they're actually going to be not feeding themselves to the adequate level and can lose weight and can be not as nutritionally fulfilled as they should be. From a dieting perspective, giving yourself the same food to eat all the time is in fact a trick to eat less. But the problem with eating, and this is one of the reasons why diets never really work, no matter what they are, is because it's such a tremendous pleasure, denying yourself of the pleasure, whether it's just eating the same soup every day, whatever it is, or not letting yourself have chocolate or ice cream or potato chips, because there is real pleasure in all of those things. We don't stick with it. We want to eat the things that really taste good to us. And so my perspective is always that you should eat whatever you want in moderation and with attention. So understanding also one of the other things where sensory specific satiety actually starts to play in is even in a short eating bout of, let's just say I had a slice of my favorite cake for dessert and I take the first bite of the cake and oh, it's sublime. I love it and so forth. If I'm paying attention, then I may notice that by the fourth bite of the cake, it's actually not nearly so wonderful or interesting to me. And, I'm not hungry because I've just had dinner. So it's not like I nutritionally need to eat because, this is essential for caloric survival. So being aware of that and saying, this is not giving me pleasure anymore. Now's the time I can stop. I can come back to it later when I'm going to be more interested in eating it and get more pleasure from it. So always being aware of that balance, that pleasure is being maximized as it should be, and you're not just sort of eating mindlessly is really important.
Okay. And then you've studied contextual environment. So, to our sense of smell and enjoyment of smell, you told me that a chemical can be identical and you can have a very different reaction based on the environment. And one of the examples you told me was smelling cheese at 2 a.m. on like a in an alleyway versus in a French restaurant.
Yeah.
And I thought a pretty very profound thought you shared from your research is that our interpretation of what we think drives its meaning. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, so thank you for bringing that up. That was it was a study I did a long time ago, but it really demonstrated what I call olfactory illusions, how you can have the perception completely change just as a function of the sort of context in which the sensory stimulus is presented to you. And in fact, the sensory stimulus is identical in both cases. So, a chemical which smells like cheese, for instance, in the context of a French restaurant would be, oh, the cheese plate must be nearby. That smells really good. I like that food and so forth. And however, if you were walking behind a dive bar at 2 a.m., that same chemical profile you may interpret, for instance, as vomit and feel like that's disgusting and you would never put that in your mouth. And so, literally, in this experiment, what I did is I had a set of different smells that had this sort of ambiguity to them. With one label, they could be perceived as that, yes, it's that positive thing. For example, another one was Christmas tree. It was a piney scent versus cleaning disinfectant. So people, I believe it's both of those things that equally well. The label is driving my interpretation, which is then driving my meaning. And the vomit Parmesan cheese one worked the best, to the point where people literally did not believe me that it was the same scent I was presenting them. Literally, this is identical. So this is almost like a magic trick you could do. Like abracadabra, change the word. And all that I did was change the word that I said before I handed it to them. And they couldn't see what the object, it wasn't an object, actually, it was just a chemical mixture that smells kind of like, it smells like cheese or it smells like vomit. Other people have done this experiment. You can also say sweaty socks. So there's a very similar kind of odor profile. But in any case, this really transforms our perception on the basis of the words that are used, or if I had visual stimuli, or if it was in real life, in a restaurant versus behind a dive bar. And this is because, again, like I said, because smell is invisible and we are such visual creatures, we're constantly looking for what is it? And as soon as we figure out sort of a rational meaning for what it is, we then think that's what it is, and that's our interpretation, and then that guides our perception. So this is just along the same continuum of, perception is reality for us, and it's extremely subjective, and we don't really realize that it's not absolute reality. So that same chemical can be absolute reality to you, vomit, or absolute reality to you, Parmesan cheese. But in fact, it is, just this benign chemical mixture that just gets influenced by the label that I give to it. But your interpretation of it drives the meaning, which then drives everything that you feel about it moving forward with it. So in one case, yes, I would eat it. It's very familiar. I like it and so forth. And in the other case, disgusting, get it away from me. I would, of course, never put that anywhere near my mouth. Just kind of showing you the extremes to which our conscious perception alters our interpretation of the world around us.
And is there something you think we should learn from that? Like trying to be aware that the labels or try to get rid of the labels? One is you gave an example of cultural foods like, is it natto or natto? How do you say it?
Natto, yeah, it's
Natto, which is fermented soybeans, and Japanese people have it for breakfast often. And as a Westerner, we probably think it's disgusting, but maybe if we went into that experience, if we're visiting Japan and we're served it for breakfast, saying, this is a wonderful breakfast food, or like, how would we get our brains around that? And then the other thing that I think is sort of like a nice corollary is picky eaters. And so we can talk about that. But first, let's talk about this.
Yeah, so I think one of the problems with natto specifically is the aroma of it. So from my perspective as a Westerner, it does not smell like anything that I've ever experienced as food. So because, I've gone through life for a long time with knowing what quote unquote food smells are, and then you present something to me, which to me does not smell at all like food, that's part of the problem, I think, for many Westerners with natto, but definitely kind of clearing your mind and saying, let me just accept this on face value, quote unquote, arm, mouth, and nose value, is a really good thing to do. And I think where that comes into play maybe more significantly is, for instance, the idea of eating insects, which I think from a protein source aspect, a health aspect, a sustainability aspect, is going to be something that we may be facing even in North America and Europe in the years to come. There truly is nothing wrong with them. They actually, other than the fact that in our mind, who's eating bugs? That's disgusting. That's gross. But lobster and shrimp are actually aquatic insects. And if we start thinking of them that way, then, your fancy dinner might suddenly turn into something that you think of as gross. Realizing that this is just a conception that this is something that we've conceived of as being bad, but ostensibly it is actually something that if we experienced it, the flavor would be quite palatable. And that's also because, generally speaking, there's not a lot of very strong flavor profile. It's mainly to do with the cooking quality. And depending upon what it is, there's a crunchy and a creamy and all these kind of nice things that you would think of experiencing. So just like, dipping your lobster in some garlic butter is delicious, or that's exactly how you can think of the experience with eating insects. So, for instance, a protein bar, which has cricket powder in it as a protein source, which is in fact very good, is an example where you would have no idea that's what you're eating because it just looks like a protein bar unless I told you. And depending upon your response to knowing that, you might go, no way, I'm never eating that again. And however, if you just relied on your sensory experience of that protein bar, you'd go, that just tasted completely fine. Maybe I really liked it.
Yeah.
Now you've told me this information and I'm distressed.
So is there a way we can train our brains to not be so distressed by our perception?
One of the things I've talked about with restaurateurs is changing the name of it. So rather than having it be crickets on a platter, whatever it was, using, for instance, maybe another language to describe it, maybe coming up with another word itself. I mean, for example, we eat beef, we don't say we eat cow. We say we transform the labels of what we're consuming all the time by, in a way, kind of making them less connected to the animal that they are, even for the animals that we do regularly consume. And for this class of animal, the insect class of animal, if we came up with a different word for them, that could be, something, who knows what, in a different language, also potentially would help to give it a certain level of elegance and sophistication, or whatever the case may be, and desirability. Again, people who are highly neophobic would not be anywhere near this, no matter what you said to them. But labeling, because it, as I've mentioned, can have such a strong impact, and coming up with kind of a new label would be one of the ways. And really just trying to give yourself the openness, if you're able to think of it in terms of what is it that I'm truly experiencing at a sensory level, and try to get my head out of the way. So rather than coming to it with all the barriers of, oh, I would never eat insects, that's just, impossible for me, trying to sort of approach it in more purely, okay, let me just try a taste of this and see whether or not it's terrible.
I feel like we tell ourselves stories. Like, I told myself I didn't like avocado, and I met my husband and he's like, everybody likes avocado. What are you talking about? And turns out I do like avocado, but maybe it was the texture, which is a whole nother thing that we could talk about, but we have so many things and I know you're short on time. But I think it's fascinating. And it's also, to me, tied to picky eaters. So I know there's science behind it. And you also said that there's pathological picky eating versus something that will pass, and occasion setting matters. So sometimes if you're at a restaurant, kids will try things they wouldn't try at home.
So just really briefly, so picky eating is something that most children go through in terms of a phase. For the most part, it will just be a phase, and then they will be willing to accept, many other foods. But for some children, it really gets to be to the point where it can be medically serious in the case of them not eating anything other than plain white crackers, for example. And this can be very difficult to deal with. And understanding, what is this to do with, and how can I work around it as a parent and also as a pediatrician? I mean, one of the often and awful things that tends to happen is that people who aren't really very aware of this or understanding of this as a condition will sort of blame the parents. Well, you'll just have to try harder to make little eat their carrots and their spinach and their chicken and so on. And little Johnny or whomever is not going to eat any of that come hell or high water because they perceive it as something as disgusting as you could possibly imagine. And because there's a real fear, this is like neophobia to the most extreme. There's a true fear of incorporating whatever that is into my body, putting it into my mouth, that it's dangerous, that it's really frightening, that it's a really sort of not a good thing to do. And the reason why the occasion setting, so for example, being at a restaurant, and this is somewhat anecdotal, but it does seem that it can be helpful, is that the idea of if I'm being served this in a restaurant, the restaurant, other people are going to. So this isn't just my house and my parents are trying to force me to eat whatever it is. This is a restaurant and I'm being offered something other than plain white crackers. And other people are surviving being in this restaurant. So maybe I can try it too, and because it's different, I'm not in my normal environment, I may be a little bit more in a good mood, I may be more open to it, then that might be a way in for a child who's a very picky eater. Unfortunately, there often tends to be a real dynamic that gets set up around the dinner table, which tends to end up being hostile and so on, and cause all kinds of problems in the family dynamic if a child is refusing to eat all kinds of foods. So it's a real level of understanding what is going on. It's often connected to other aspects of anxiety the child may be going through, but not able to express. So, the it's important to be as empathetic and as kind as possible and to try to sort of figure out avenues. Another thing to do would be preparation. So how is the food that you're attempting to serve presented, and having a conversation with your child to see if that's possible. So this isn't, and I'm not a clinical psychologist and so I don't want this to, I don't want to give like really direct advice, but it is a complex situation. And, first of all, the one thing is parents should not feel guilty or that it's their fault. They're somehow doing something wrong. And there is support for this for people who do work specifically in this area. So I think that is just something to be aware of. And again, also realizing that this is on a continuum of people in general being not very comfortable with eating new foods or different foods or so on. So like everyone is somewhere on this neophobia scale, and it just depends on how far off you are on it and what can be done to help you kind of get into a more normal range. Because it can, as you get older, also potentially become socially awkward and so forth. Although that often tends to be a time when there are some opening for the person because they get into social situations with their peers. The family dynamic isn't so much of a factor anymore, and they may be more willing to try something there. So,
Interesting. Do you want to quickly tell us about your books?
absolutely. So, my first book is called The Scent of Desire. And it is all about the sense of smell. So the subtitle is Understanding Your Enigmatic Sense of Smell. And this is basically, has a sexy title. There is some sex in it, but it's mainly about everything you ever want to know about your sense of smell. My next book was called That's Disgusting. And it's about the emotion of disgust, which is related to smell and food and so forth, but is actually also at a fundamental level very much connected to the way we process smell. So like I've been talking about food as well, like the way that I perceive something turns it from being delicious to disgusting, and how much the mind is involved in the emotion of disgust. It is really not a black and white emotion at all. And it is actually an emotion that we need to learn what is disgusting and what is not. So little kids will pick up all kinds of things that adults go, no, 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 do not go anywhere near that. It's disgusting, it's dangerous or whatever. And you have to learn that the poop that the dog left or the dead bird or whatever it is something not to be handled. And that is why it has that learned aspect to it. It has this, what does it mean aspect to it, which is so critical to our interpretation, as well as context, like being in one situation, deciding something's disgusting. And it has a huge social component to it, prejudice and all kinds of other things that come from that. And my most recent book is called Why You Eat What You Eat: The Science Behind Our Relationship with Food. And it's about a lot of the things we've talked about already today, in addition to many other social features, neurological features. So like the neurochemicals like endorphins or serotonin and so forth that can be elicited from eating. And really my goal in that book like I sort of said throughout, is giving people an understanding of what's going on while they're eating, all the different levels from whom you're with to what it looks like, what it smells like, what's going on in your head at the time, and then having people feel at least they have an inkling of some understanding of that to give them the feeling that they have some control over their relationship with food rather than food controlling them. And also that variety is the spice of life. And don't worry about eating the chocolate cake as long as you have some spinach as well.
Amazing, amazing. Well, we'll put links to all of these and your nonprofits that you're connected with. I think there's so much. I feel like we've really only scratched the surface. There's so much to talk about. It's so fascinating. And honestly, I don't feel like these are things people are talking about at a mainstream level. I'm sure you're hoping that changes with your books and also with the advocacy work. And hopefully it will, especially if these recent studies on the connection between sense of smell and longevity and lifespan become more mainstream. If people read about those and people are talking about those, I think that will be a really nice avenue into people learning more about this, what they can do, and also just understanding why we do the things we do is fascinating. And I think it helps us have a more present, intentional way of living each day, which is also, I think, a wonderful goal.
Yes. And thank you so much, Ashley. It's been a delight to be on your podcast. And if you would like to have me back on and we can talk about more things, I'd be more than happy to do that.
Wonderful. Okay. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ashley.
If you've been a listener to On the Table with Ashley for a while now, you know that at the end of every episode, we ask our guests the same questions. And while we had to end the recording with Dr. Herz a bit early due to scheduling, we wanted to read aloud her written answers to the questions. And so I'm going to read them here for you now. If you're interested in learning more about Dr. Herz or any of her recommendations, we recommend you go to the show notes where we've linked a bunch of resources that she shared with us. You can also learn about Dr. Herz at rachelherz.com. Question 1, are you in a phase in your life where you enjoy entertaining in your home? Why or why not? Dr. Herz's answer is, we do entertain at our home and enjoy it very much. My husband and I both love to cook and to have people over. We don't entertain nearly as much as we did during the summer of 2020. My husband built us an outdoor kitchen and dining pavilion. Because of COVID, no one had other plans, and so every Friday, Saturday, and sometimes Sunday, we would have over couples for dinner. I wish we still had as much ease in entertaining as we did then. The hardest part about entertaining now is the planning around everyone's busy schedules. I'm sure we can all relate to that. Next question. Do you have 1 or 2 top resources, books, websites, courses you can recommend to our listeners? And Dr. Herz's answer is, I do truly recommend my book, Why You Eat What You Eat, for all things related to the psychology of food and eating behavior. For general inquiries, I typically go to Wikipedia or any other trusted direct source. I don't like AI-generated summaries. My favorite research website is Google Scholar. And then the last question, what do you do for yourself? Do you have a practice, a focus, a habit, or a daily routine that you adhere to that contributes to your success? Dr. Herz's answer is, my daily routine is to walk 3 to 5 miles a day, weather permitting. I live in a rustic suburban area, and though there aren't many sidewalks, which is a bit dangerous, I walk, usually with my dog, every day, typically broken into 2 outings. I mainly work from my home office, and these walking breaks and helps problem solving, creativity, or inspiration come to me without effort. Walking is my favorite mental and physical health routine. That's all. Thank you so much for listening to another episode of On the Table with Ashley, and we will see you back here in 2 weeks. Bye. On the Table with Ashley is presented by Amatond, an elevated, everyday, luxury home and tableware brand with products designed to cultivate connection. You can learn more about Amatond at amatendre.com or on Instagram at Amatond. By subscribing to our newsletter on the Amatond website, you'll receive updates on new episodes as well as promotions relating to Amatond and Amatond's products. Send us an email at reachoutanytime@amatond.com if you have ideas for guests or series ideas you'd like to pass along. Thanks for listening.